Yeah. Hello. Good morning. So what I'm going to talk about is to discuss the relationship between OpenStreetMap and the research community. And the research community that I look at is what's called geographical information science, a word that was invented about 20 years ago and is now very common to describe people who work in the area of research about GIS. So we'll start with kind of talking about OpenStreetMap in academic research and give a bit of overview of what is happening. Look at the different ways in which OpenStreetMap OSM is being used and with the research. So there are different types of relationship. There is what I call using, there is researching OSM itself and working with OSM, and there are different things. Now, I think that it's important to also explain in a kind of clear way to the community what researchers, what academic community can and can't do about the relationship, what kind of things we are good at, what kind of things we are less good at. And some suggestion this time to researchers about what are my reflections on the way that you should engage with OpenStreetMap, what should be the rules of engagement. So here's the first fact about the importance of OpenStreetMap to research. This is just taken from Google Scholar, which it's a special search engine within Google that just search academic papers. And you can see the curve there about the growth in the number of papers from 13 or 10 actually in 2006 to now over 520 papers. And the more professional and more discerning search engine, one of them is the Web of Knowledge and the other one, Elsevier Scirus, both of them are actually showing now papers from about OSM. That's probably the first ever paper that talked about OSM. It appeared in 2006, and thanks to the practices of academic citation, you see that they visited the website in January 2006, so fairly early on. And interesting that because it's appeared about development of global domain, public domain, global road database, what they were saying at that time, they were saying two notable limitations about OSM. It might take years to cover the world on an all-volunteers basis, and there would be little ability to impose standards or to undertake comprehensive independent data verification. I think that both these things are kind of things that you need to think about when you'll see that the research is actually showing that those assumptions are not completely correct. And then came the boom for the geographical information science community. This is one of the most cited papers that mention OpenStreetMap. It was written by Mike Goodchild, who is also the person responsible for inventing the geographical information science, so is inventing acronym. There is almost an unanimous agreement that this acronym, the acronym that he invented about volunteer geographical information, is not as great as GIScience, and almost every paper that talks about it complain especially about the V, the volunteering aspect of it. But Mike Goodchild does raise this issue that some level of expertise is required in the use of GIS and the project software, in the basic principle of geographical measurement, and in the project system for classifying street. And that's something that was mentioned yesterday. That's the whole problem of getting new people in, and it's correct issues. So we can talk about three types of research that links, types of research with OpenStreetMap. The first one is with OSM. So you kind of work within the community, identify some need that come from the community or issues that people are raising, and something that come, for example, I don't know how many people know, but there are on the wiki research pages, and there is also ideas page. And if you have something that you would like to do, you can put it there, and maybe researchers can pick it as a research question, something to work with. Then there is research about OSM. So that's kind of people standing from the side and looking and observing OSM and what's going on there, which is happening once this VGI concept was invented. And that's also involved comparing it to other projects. And finally, and one that is growing very rapidly, is using OSM. So those are people that need geographical information. They found it difficult or impossible to get data otherwise, or they find it very easy to use, and they go for it and use OSM to explore different scientific issues. So data quality, interestingly, was appearing in both from the community and from the outside as one of the first and major area of research, and it's an area that continues to be fairly active to this day. So I call it the Wikipedia problem, because it's the same thing that people started complaining about Wikipedia when it appeared. And the issue is, oh, we know nothing about this. It's all done by amateurs who know nothing about what they're doing. You need professionals to do mapping. You need professionals to write encyclopedia. No one else can do it. Oh, and even worse, there isn't any top-down specifications. How can you create a map without top-down specifications? That's kind of the thinking that was at the time. And I actually remember someone that today is very strong supporter of OSM, driving with him from one place to another, and he continuously raised this problem and said, oh, it can't be any good. There is all these standards. That's how maps are being created. You can't do it otherwise. So that's one thing. So the point about it, that once you have the Wikipedia problem, the development of research that is about data quality can have the buy-in from users of the map, so people that will use it. And that was an issue at the beginning, because if nobody used that, why to create the map? And it's some making it a very meaningful project. And the importance of academic research in this context is that it provides the credibility, one thing, but more importantly, we have access to a lot of reference data sets. So in the UK, we are usually 3 clicks away from using the national data sets, and we don't need to tell them what we're using it for. So we can do it for whatever we want. Although in my case, I wanted to do the easy way. I didn't want to merge things, so I actually contacted the National Mapping Agency, told them what the research is about, and got a DVD in the post with all the data. And what this kind of research showed is that we have now, at least that's the list that I've got. If other people have other places, I think you will talk about the issue of what researchers can do and can't do. But here's a whole set of research that cover places like the UK, France, Germany, Switzerland, Greece. I think there is also some examples from Ireland that show that the data is accurate. So, and that is a body of research that demonstrates that across places, across data sets, so each place used a different data set, and also slightly different methods. Some of them are replicating the same method, but some are using a different method. They were showing that the data is of good quality. And they were showing things like a mix between what's called positional accuracy, so are the lines in the right place in the world. Attribute accuracy is the name of the street, the correct name of the street. And completeness, coverage, which used to be one of the mantras of geographical data set. So here's an example from very recent work of one of my PhD students, Thomas Kokoletsos, who is now taking, after we compared to lower quality data set, this time we went for the top quality data set in the UK. It's called the Integrated Transport Network. It's part of the master map data set of the National Mapping Agency. And what you're looking at is, if I'm not wrong, Hyde Park. And here's the information that exists in OpenStreetMap. So you see that because OpenStreetMap have also their paths and other information, you have a different coverage. So you can see the street network. Now you can see the OpenStreetMap network. And therefore, we created a whole matching algorithm that matched the two together and allow us to evaluate what is the coverage. So for example, look at the matching between ITN, and this time we are comparing the line, we're comparing very strict condition about the distance between the line and the two lines in the two systems. So you get into matching that is 99%, 98%, very high matching. On the other end, if you do it the other way around and do it from OSM to the national data set, something that a few years ago was not even thought of, you actually show where the data set, where the national data set is not covering the same information. Although, to be honest, ITN got a data set of parts, and that's something that could have been included. So it's somewhat unfair comparison. But that's the interesting bit. Now that you move to the whole area of London, so this is the London in general, and somewhere around the middle you have the Thames. And what you can see is that the dark green is all the areas where the matching is really high. So you see that if you look at it from ITN, you have really, you take the top data set and you take OSM, and you get almost 100% matching. Although, as you go to the outside areas, it drops. Or this is an example from rural England, somewhere in the north. So it's just west of Newcastle. And what you can see here is that in rural area, you would expect it, the quality does drop. There is less matching to ITN. And here's another area, that's Greater Liverpool area. And starting to the matching percentage, you can see the whole area and the ITN matching. So you see that in Liverpool, the coverage is less good than what we have in London. But also what is interesting is that now that we have the matching, we can do checking for positional accuracy. So as it goes into the red, it means that the distance between the two lines is greater. So you can see that in the city center and in some of the other areas, there is fairly high coverage, whereas that's the area that they're in green. But in large areas, Liverpool is an example where there is a need for more work. And what else was discovered through this research of positional accuracy and other aspects is this kind of quality indicators. So remember that the first claim was that you wouldn't figure out how you can show that there is good quality data in OSM. So one way to do it is to think about self-contained quality indicators, such as looking at the number of contributors per square kilometer. And what was found by some of my students is that as you increase the number of contributors per square kilometer, the positional accuracy improves. And there is some work in Maynooth at the moment to looking at highly edited objects. So current understanding of the quality of OSM is that the quality can be good as the best data set. But you need to understand that this data is heterogeneous. It's not going to give you one measure for everything. You need to kind of think about it as patchwork, and you need to understand that you can't just say OSM is good, OSM is bad. You need to kind of ask a more complex question, which is where and for what? And those two questions are something that actually researchers are looking at. There is a rural-urban gap. There is also evaluation methods that are robust and work across cultures, and some of them been automated, so such the work that I showed about Liverpool and London and other areas. And we are starting to see some intrinsic indicators that are internal to us, and so we don't need anymore to have an external data set to compare it to, although that's an area that we have currently one, and we will need to develop many more of them. Then there is the research that looked at the participant behavior. So that is from the research of Nama Budatuki, who done a survey, and we talked about it last year, that shows you the demographic, and the age group, and also the education, and many other things that are appearing within his papers. But there is also Chris Parker, who done some work, Leonard and Coleman and a few others that written on social aspects. And there is a body of research on the social aspect of the community. Some of it is done with the community, some of it done with this kind of external observation. So you need to find where it is, and you need to know about it. And then there are applications of it, and of course, one of the most famous applications of OSM is emergency and humanitarian situation. We heard about it all yesterday, but that's one of the first papers that actually described this use case. So it was written by Matthew Zook and also by Shin Gorman from now GeoIQ. So other areas of activities that worth mentioning, there is the whole work on 3D models and routing application. There is the whole neo-cartography that Steve mentioned yesterday. There are the areas of semantics and ontologies, so how you explain the way that the world is structured, the schema of OSM and what you do with it for different applications. There are technical applications that are being done in different parts of the world, and trust and general quality, which is a work that's going on in by Martin Van Exel. But one of the most interesting aspects of this whole research is that it raised some fundamental questions about long-held views that exist within the GIS community for sometimes 40 years. So one thing, it's shaken the whole concept of completeness. It's actually opened up the fact that, as the ITN example shows, actually nothing is complete. It's not just that OSM is not complete. It's a national data set that is also, actually they've never been completed because they had their own rate of updating, and it wasn't complete there. And what also we mean by data quality. So all these kind of things were started to be questioned in different ways. And you can see questions, for example, showing that some of the data sets that were created in by professionals are actually created by one dedicated professional. So Mike Goodall talks about geological maps in California that actually were created by one person. And it's fairly subjective interpretation. So wouldn't it be better to do it in a crowdsourcing among people that are interested in geology, and then you would get some consensus view. So all kind of things like that are being questioned and being opened up. But the other bit about the research, and one of the things is this feeling that you need, as a researcher, you need this kind of critical friendship with OSM community. And what it means is that you basically, on one side you're a friend and you're trying to help where you can, but at the same time, you're not afraid to say what's wrong and what doesn't work. So just to show you that bit of work which I started back in 2008, that's thanks to Ollie O'Brien. Ollie? Yours. Yeah, there. And I'll just make it a bit stronger so you can see the colors on the screen. And what you're looking at is England in 2008. You then can move to March 2009, and you can start to see how the completeness compared to a low quality or a medium quality data set that is fairly generalized is being covered. And you can see how over time the coverage is getting better and better. So the more blue it is, the more complete it is. And you can zoom into any area that you want. So for example, we talked about the area around Liverpool in the previous slides. So we can look at it to how it developed over time. So at the beginning I've done just analysis of England, and then now you can see bits of Wales appearing on the map. But it also means noticing things like that, which I've started doing since 2008, of looking at the coverage compared to the index of deprivation, which tells you where are the poor places, which are here, and where are the rich places in the UK, which are over there, and showing how complete is, if we're taking this measure of completeness, what is the completeness across the country. And this one is without looking at attributes, so just looking at the way and places that people digitize lines. And you could see at the beginning this gap between rich and poor places, and you can see that it remains throughout the period. So you can say that the line is going up, but the gap remains. And the only good news about that is that if in the previous periods the gap between the rich and the poor places is increasing, in the last period where I was analyzing, which is, it's not completely on the graph, it's October and March, October 2010 to March 11, the gap was starting to shrink. My guess is that because the UK is starting to be exhausted, so people are actually starting to digitize also the lines in poor places. And there is another way of looking at, once you introduce attributes and you look for names and places where people have been, you can see that actually two places that are low. One of them is these poor places at the bottom, and then in the middle you also see the rural places. And yes, there is a total increase in coverage, so we're actually moving up the scale all the time. One of the surprising things is that the pattern remains the same throughout the whole period. So there is something there about the fact that the community remains strongly urban and fairly affluent. And there is a counterexample. So Tom Chance in London went to one of the housing estates in the area of Elephant and Castle, and as part of the redevelopment of the neighborhood, he actually spent time and talked with the council. And you can see here mapping at the level of also of the trees. And here the trees were important because it was part of the discussion of the community about which trees are going to be uprooted during a development. So there are counterexamples of people actually going to the bottom of the scale and doing things. But also we are using OpenStreetMap for fairly serious and more serious analysis. Now that we know that it's fairly complete, we can use it for things like space syntax. And space syntax is a method that tries to understand the structure of the city, something called morphology. And you can see that this is showing how different measure choice, which I won't go through exactly the aspect, but it's based on graph theory and showing the connectivity of different parts of the city. And you can see that the center of London is lighting up. Now, the advantage of using OSM for this type of research is exactly that we have all these pathways and all these other things that won't appear on national data sets, which allow us to really look at how people move across the city and not just rely on a road network. Or another example that's a close range look at Surbiton, again, for the same reason that we actually have the footpaths and the way that people cut across fields or across green spaces, we can actually understand how people move across an area in a different way. So in this case, we kind of compared it also to ITN, and we are still discussing which data sets to use. But there are important open questions. So in terms of research, those are kind of things that researchers will be interested in knowing, like cultural differences. We sort of know, within the community it's known that different places operate differently, that you get these differences. But we should do a comparative analysis of taking the different countries and then, for example, doing a spatial temporal analysis of the pattern of contribution, the number, is the participation inequality, the fact that in each place there is someone who is contributing much more than anyone else, appearing in all places or other places that are more egalitarian, is the kind of intervention that was happening in Haiti really changed the way the community worked? Is it completely different community and way it works? So those kind of questions, I think, are interesting and are important also for the community to think of. There is the impacts of imports, which is something that is going on. And it's both organizational, both the updates, but it can also be asked about well-mapped area. So what happened to an area that is very well mapped? Is it dependent on a specific person, or does it get updates from also new people that are joining in? There are, therefore, questions about spatial and temporal patterns of engagement and contribution, and the role of silent mappers. Like most people, all people here actually, I'm willing to guess, are on some mailing list of OSM. But they don't cover the 400,000 people that ever contribute, or if we say just 100,000 of them contribute. Still, not everyone is on the list. There are people that are joining in and do some work and never communicate with other people. You know, one of the things that was very clear in the work of NAMA was that mapping parties are actually good for people that are highly engaged in the project, but less important for people that are new. Some people just join in and done their work. So what's going on there? There is the things that I talked about last year, the tyranny of place hypothesis, I call it. The kind of things that you really need someone in each place in order to get the high quality. That you can't just do it with people that are not living in a place. So to see what's the impact of this kind of people in one place and connecting mappers to where they are. And I think that that is important in terms of recruitment or thinking of engagement and other things. And then there is the internal culture, which Steve was a bit more clear about it yesterday, but it's got an impact on the gender distribution of the community. It's got certain of an exclusion. It is interesting to see if the flaming wars and other things are influencing long-term engagement, because there are people that are resounding with a big message and all the rest of it, but does it matter for everyone else? Is the fact that someone is leaving just matter to him, or it's usually him, it's not her, but always does it influence other people? Then there is the legal studies, one area where it will be really good to get researchers in, and there is an area of research now about intellectual property and about spatial information. For example, at UCL we have few people in the legal studies who are looking at it, and we can actually look at those issues, and I think that it will be beneficial to the community to have, say, to convince a PhD student or someone at, at least LLM to look at different aspects and help with a bit of directed work. And there are, of course, all the usability studies. You've seen, I hope that at least some of you have seen yesterday the work of Patrick Weber and Kay Jones about the usability of the different editors, but there is many more aspects to do. So what are the limitations? What kind of, after all these things, what are the issues? So here are some of the limitations of academic research. We do have, I can say, a sort of attention deficit disorder, an academic attention deficit disorder, to be more accurate. And that's because the way research is designed is that I can't go and report. It's at the beginning of science, 300 years ago, modern science, you could write letter and say, I've done a bit more work, here's what I've done. I've done a bit more work, here's what I've done. The incentives now are such that if I just say, here's another report about the development of OSM since last time I've measured it, it won't get published, it won't get accepted, it will be seen as irrelevant. The expectation from university research is to always move forward, to do new things. So even, for example, we'll manage to develop a method that will automate the analysis of different data sets, and you can just drop two data sets. We can't do the commercialization of it, or even just the community aspect of it, of putting it and improving the code to the degree that it can be used by someone using a web interface. That's the way things work. We just not build a routine. The publications are very important to all academic researchers. So ideas and someone to come, you can actually identify, I'll connect it to the final point about the academic careers with thematic focus. If you have a question, if you have something that interests you, find an academic that got a thematic interest in similar things, or ask an academic that is already linked to the community and ask them about who to approach. And if you find them, you can just give them ideas. Actually, researchers usually look for ideas, not just for ourselves. We also run, for example, at UCL, a master program where we have 20 students a year who are looking for research topics. So they can pick up something. Interestingly, we can provide power and network up to a point, and you can see on, Imperial and UCL, and UCL been contributing the electricity for OpenStreetMap for a while now. That's not a problem. It's kind of sit in the corner, and it's fine. It's one of these things that happen. It's much more difficult to give money, and actually, we need it the other way around, which mean that you kind of, what resources do we have? We have students. As I mentioned about students, they exist on all levels. And again, reflect back on the development of OSM, for example, in the UK. Durham was one of the places that was very fastly covered because it was students that got engaged in it. Cambridge was one of the first cities that was completely covered because you have a university there. So you can actually use this resource and think about where to get more connection with that group. And there is also this whole match funding issue, that across the world now, government want academic research to be linked to industry, so they would like it to have this connection. And if you can find a company that will give a little bit of money to the academic research, it is possible to do all kind of interesting bits of research. But that's probably something, as the OSMF hopefully will become more and more organized, it will be possible to do things. So now to kind of finish off, I'll just reflect on what I would say to someone who wants to work with OSM, what my rules of engagement or code of engagement with OSM research. So my first rule is that do some mapping. If you're starting to work with OSM, if you haven't done that, you won't understand what it is about. You won't understand the procedures, you won't understand the actions, and you then make some silly mistakes in the way you write up about OSM. So, for example, to this day, you see data is mostly collected by GPS, although practically since 2006, aerial imagery is much more important. Secondly, read. People also, again, you see people that kind of start doing things with some reading few academic papers. So, for example, Patrick Weber and I got a paper that we wrote over, I think, a weekend or maybe slightly more than this, describing OSM as the first go in 2008. Now, that doesn't describe OSM as it is now. And referring to a paper is nice for us, for our academic career, but it's the wrong thing to do. So people need to read the different sources. Then there is explore the data, go and do work. And again, you'll be surprised that some people write about OSM without actually understanding the data and looking at it. And then the most important thing, and it's true also about the previous topic, even if you got the data and you read the wiki, go and talk with someone in the community. You will discover the kind of things that are not written anywhere that will explain to you what's going on. Now, then you have the issue of what to do with your research. So you have, first of all, I would say the principle of open access. You took it from a community that kind of go, at least for now, still by CC by SA. So you need to go to something similar. And I'm, for example, trying to make the case that if I'm writing a paper about OSM, it will go out in a journal where I can put the paper itself on a website where anyone can download it, not putting it behind the paywall. And also one of the reasons that I'm using the blog for that is that principle. Then there is also the principle of open knowledge, of pushing it a bit further. If you've done your analysis, so while you've done your analysis, great, you can keep it for yourself. But the moment you finished it, put the code, put the data as much as you can. For example, I have a problem if I'm using the conflating with ordnance survey data set. But if you can, try to make it so you can release it out where possible. Also, remember that you have responsibility to your academic field. So even if you get into this very close relationship and you like the OSM community and work with it regularly, you still need to have the responsibility as an academic to kind of remember that you need to be the critical friend that I mentioned earlier. And OSM is really good at dealing with criticism. You know, it's just a pleasure to present to it. Finally, along the rules, teach. Don't just use it for research and kind of write papers about it. Teach it. And we've been using OSM now as an introduction to GIS as a mapping part at the beginning of the year, and it works really, really well. That's a picture from Harry Wood from last year. A few other small points, the maintaining of links with the OSM community, which kind of obvious and go throughout. Links with the VGI research community are also important for researchers, and exploring comparison and parallels. So just to kind of finish off, it's very clear that OSM become a very significant resource within GIScience research. One of the funny things is that people sometimes do this wrong equation of VGI equal OSM. And as people within the community probably will be aware, it's not the same community as MapMaker. You can't draw conclusion from studying going on in MapMaker. You can't do this thing across Wikimapia and across lots of other sources of geographical information, but it does happen. So there are issues about it, but there are studying it, using it, improving it. And there are very many important questions, and I think that it will be useful for both sides, the researchers and the OSM community, to kind of look after the research area in the wiki and develop it and use it much more. So thank you very much. And
thank you very much, Muki, for the excellent presentation. Are there any questions, comments? Steve?
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Excellent, Muki. I know the UK best. I wondered, you mentioned the rural-urban divide in accuracy. I wonder if there's any mileage, if you'll excuse the pun, in looking at the way that the data is provided in rural areas. Because I would suspect that in the UK, a lot has been taken from out-of-copyright maps and not done very well. But because it's there, people don't bother to do GPS trace to correct that. Is that something anyone that you know has thought of?
No, that's one of these things why data quality continue to be an open question and worth doing. Now, here's where the actual problem of academic research kicks in. Because the types of exploring that type of question won't lead anymore to a high-quality publication. So I can't actually spend my time in terms of where I dedicate my work on. On the other hand, it's very suitable for an MSc project. So someone who's doing MSc can pick up the method, can take out the code, and do some bits of work. So that's one of these areas where I would say the ideas should be written somewhere on the wiki with approaching students. So just like doing summary of code, it will be really valuable if the community decide that they are doing summary of project with students who are doing MSc courses, and then finding out, just in the UK, there are about 17 to 18 MSc courses in GIS. And it's very easy to find them, send an email to the person that's responsible for them, and say, here's a page with project IDs. If someone pick up a project, we will work together with them. Once you have that, you can do a project that's sponsoring a project, and it's free.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I'd just like to pick up on the last point you said about engaging with the community, which is teach students. there have been a couple of examples. I think the University of Niš in, well, somewhere in the former Yugoslavia, I think it's still in Serbia. They had a large number of students who recently did a disastrous number of very poor, verging on vandalistic edits. My own experience was much less dramatic, but the local university decided to run a course either for the geography students or for CS students doing street mapping. And I suddenly had a lot of new editors locally to me who I was having to send emails saying, well, do you really want to map it that way? And I would have rather welcomed that the university had contacted local mappers before engaging students to do mapping work. And one of the students in that department, one of the PhD students in that department, is actually a long-time OSM contributor, and they have a lot of engagement with people in the OSM community, but they didn't bother to engage with local mappers. And I think that's going to become a significant issue over time as more universities follow this teaching practice, including OSM and teaching.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and our mapping parties are always organized with the local OSM community. That's why I'm saying there is this connection of, that's why I've also said, don't just go to the wiki and read it and doing other things. The community can improve it. There was keep on talks about the fact that you need to provide a proper sets of teaching of, for example, in education, can tell university that is where you start, that is how you teach it. Try to get in touch with someone from the community before you do that. But I completely agree with that view.
Maybe a final question, please.
My name is Angie Voss from Fraunhofer. So we are interested in using OSM.
Yeah.
And now a question on the new license. So if I publish a paper on OSM, I believe this is a produced work. And then if I am forced to provide the derivative databases that I have used. And that means that I cannot use data associated with OSM if the other data is not available under a similar license. What do you think?
I would say no, it's not true. It's really not true, because what you can do is you can treat it the same way, okay? And that's something that I heard a lot of people doing. The same concept was during the red herring between Google and OSM about Haiti. In your data set, you have done some conflation and you have changed OSM, so it's kind of, you got a new data set. You don't need to do anything with your derivative because it's mixed between the two and there is no expectation from the OSM community to do that. So actually the OSM community, in your case, you after all done the whole coverage of Germany, you provided something really useful to the community. So put your paper in an open access place so people can use it for their purposes. If you've done anything that is the processing of the pre-processing of the OSM dataset that might be useful for someone else, put that in an open access place. And if it's derivative, then you can't do anything. If the pre-processing was based on something that came from another dataset, that's it. You say, sorry, I can't do these kind of things. I never had problems because actually the whole point about the license, OSM doesn't have a legion of lawyers that will come after you. You're trying to do the right thing. That's the way to interpret it, and that's one of the bizarre things about this whole licensing issue that the community is wrapping itself in knots about. It's not that there will be lawyers that will run after you. There aren't any. Mozilla doesn't have lawyers to run after people about copyright breach, and it's that much bigger. So why people are so concerned about it,
Okay, I guess with this, thanks again to our keynote speaker, excellent presentation. We've learned about research is relevant in, about, and on OSM. If you want to know more about research and OpenStreetMap, you might want to use the 2-minute break now to go into the other seminar room and to keep on going immediately.